basic notions you need to make your first sewing project a pillowcase. I have got 2 pieces of fabric. The smaller piece is 1/3 of a yard, and the larger piece is 1/4 of a yard, or 3/4 of a yard. And I've got some trim, this is optional, and my thread to match, scissors, and you'll need pins, sewing pins. So here you can see I have the 2 pieces laid out, the 3/4 of a yard and the 1/3 of a yard. And the first thing we're going to do is prepare our fabric. This fabric is folded in half. I'm going to show you, I'm going to open it up so you can see. See, it's double layer. This is the folded edge. This is the cut edge where they cut it off the bolt. And this is the selvage. And this is where it was woven onto the loom. And this is a very tightly woven edge. And it's not pretty. And we're actually going to cut it off. So that's the next thing I'm going to do, is I'm going to start preparing my fabric by cutting off the selvage. Alright, so I have started cutting the selvage edge off. On this fabric, it's very easy to see where the print ends and the selvage begins. So that's where I am cutting, and you only want to cut one selvage at a time. You don't want to cut through both layers of fabric. On the other side of the fabric, the selvage is harder to see from the right side. They've printed all the way to the edge, but if you look on the wrong side of the fabric, it's kind of easier to see where we're going to cut. So that's where we're going to cut for the second side. Something to look for when you bring your fabric home after you purchased it is the cut edge. Sometimes it comes home very crooked from the store. So if you look, I'm just going to kind of let you see how mine is. It's not terrible. Sometimes the edge will be cut really crooked like this, and so your one edge of your fabric is a different measurement than the other. And if you have that, that can cause problems with your sewing project. So I'm just comparing my 2 cut edges, and they're really not that far off. So we can leave those alone, and I'm going to now prepare the smaller piece. The way this works is this larger piece of fabric is the body of the pillow. This small piece will be the edge trim, and I'm actually making 2 different pillowcases. A map one, and this one that's sort of botanical and newsprint with pretty little butterflies and floral, and this one's going to have the lace on it. I'm going to just say something really quick about the fabric. This is a woven cotton fabric. I'm going to kind of get close so you can see how it looks. Let me show you the back side. It's woven, not knit. Knit is like for a t-shirt or sweatshirt, that sort of thing. So you want to choose a fabric that is stable. See, it doesn't have no stretch. Nice and stable. Cotton is the best if you're going to sleep on it. It just breathes better. You can get a cotton blend, but there are so many beautiful, nice cottons out there. All of the quilt shops, hobby shops, fabric stores will have just rows and rows and rows of really interesting and fun prints. So I'm sure you'll want to know why I'm cutting the selvage off. If you've sewn before, if you had a grandma that helped you, they might have left the selvage on because it's tightly woven and the fabric won't fray. It won't fray like the cut edge if you leave it. The reason we cut it off is because it is more tightly woven, and it actually will make your project pucker. It will not sew the same there. If you sew just slightly crooked, you end up with this showing on your project, and there's no way that can show if we get rid of it. So there's lots of reasons to cut it off, and the number one reason is it's a higher quality project if there's no selvage left in it. Okay, I'm going to just show you real quick how I set up to sew. You may be sitting on or sewing at your dining room table or a TV tray. It depends on what your setup is, but this is a very efficient and easy way to your space if you can. So I have my sewing machine and my overlock machine, which is an edge finisher. And then you turn the corner and I have my ironing board. And the ironing board is set to the same height as my other tables and equipment, so I can sit in my chair and just spin in a circle and iron and press and do everything all in one spot. Okay, so we have cut off the selvage off of our fabric. This is my 3/4 of a yard piece that will be the body. This one is the 1/3 of a yard. That will be the band. And the first thing we want to do is make sure our body and band are the same width. So I'm actually comparing them to see that they aren't the same, because if they're from a different manufacturer, one may be woven wider than the other, and then the pieces don't fit together. These were from the same manufacturer and they're the same width. The next thing we're going to do is flip this around so that we have right sides together. So I have right side to right side like this. Now I'm going to pin it. I'm going to lay this down right here like this, and we're going to put pins along the edge. And when we pin, we always pin perpendicularly. Okay, this is going to be my stitching line, so I want my pin to be perpendicular. If we pin the same direction we're stitching, when the machine is coming in, it'll catch on the pin, it can hit the pin more likely, and it also can cause more problems. So always pin perpendicularly. So we're going to pin like this, and you don't need to pin a lot. 8 to 12 inches is all it takes for something like this. All right. Now we're ready to go to the machine. You can see as you look through the fabric, this is actually directional fabric. I'm going to open it up so you can see. It has writing on it. So when I'm stitching, I want to be aware of that so that I don't end up with my words upside down on my project. So right here I can see Pacific Ocean. This is going to be the bottom of my project. I'm going to go ahead and put pins in the bottom now, and that helps me know when I go to the machine so I don't accidentally sew with the wrong end and have an upside down pillowcase. Alright, so now we're at the sewing machine, and we are going to set the machine up for a regular straight stitch. Every machine's going to be a little different, but on mine I actually select straight stitch so you can see it's highlighted. And then I want to make sure the stitch length is between 2.5 and 3, and I'm actually going to make it closer to 3. And then you want stitch width at 0. If it is a number at all, you will get a zigzag. So we want no stitch width, only stitch length. And I've already got my machine threaded. Here's my top thread, and my machine comes behind here, down, goes behind under this little thing, into the take-up arm, and then down to the needle. And then I have my bobbin threaded. So that's it. This is the reverse button on my machine. You need to find where you reverse on your machine. Every machine, if it is in the last 70 years, if it's been made within the last 70 years, you should have a reverse button somewhere on there. If not, there's another little trick we can do. But hopefully you have a reverse button. Hopefully your machine's got that. And then I have actually an extra light just because it helps me see at my machine. And now we're going to set up to sew. Okay, we're at the machine. It's set for a straight stitch, a regular straight stitch. We make sure that the threads for the bobbin and the top are up in the machine and under the foot and pull to the back, okay? So we don't have a thread over the top of the foot. I'm going to line this up on the 5/8 inch seam allowance. You can see that I have it just behind the needle. I'll sink my needle like that, okay? 5/8 inch line, my edge is with the 5/8 inch line, and I've sunk my needle. Now I'm going to take a couple stitches. Oops, it's not set for straight stitch. We're going to go back. I still had it for zigzag. Now it's a straight stitch. Take a couple stitches, and now I'm going to back stitch. Look. Always back stitch when you start and stop. Pull out the pin before you move on. I know we sometimes forget, but it's best to never sew over a pin. And we're just going to straight stitch all the way down. And you can sew that too. Okay, we're coming to the corner. Down here, see, I just sewed over a pin. Don't do that. I just told you not to do that. Here I come to the corner. My machine actually has this line that shows me it's 5/8 inch that direction too. So when my edge is cornered to 5/8 to 5/8, I'm going to sink my needle and turn. And now I have a nice perfect corner. I don't have to back stitch that corner because the threads did not break. And now I'm doing the bottom. Always sew from cut edge towards the fold. That will keep you from getting buckles or puckers at my folded edge. I'm going to sew as close to the edge as I can, sink my needle, and backstitch. Whoops. I'm having a hard time with backstitch from this angle. There we go. All right. And that is the basic for the body. Okay? Now we're going to do the same thing with the band. Now we're going to press our stitches. We're actually just going to take the iron and go over the stitches. This slightly embeds them into the fabric, and it actually gives your fabric a better finish when you're done. And I'm going to just go over the whole thing. I am not going to hit that edge too much because I don't want to put a permanent crease. It's already got quite a bit of one from being on the bolt. Alright, so we're just going to do that all the way down. See the difference? Look at pressed, not pressed. And it makes a difference, and I'll show you. Here's the seam line. Right now, this is how the seam line looks. And then I'm going to press it, and you'll see the difference. Pressed over that seam line, I'm going to open it up, and there's our edge. Now you can actually press again very carefully. Look at how pretty that makes your stitching line look. It's very attractive. But we're not done yet. We're going to actually finish our seam allowance. This is seam allowance. Seam allowance is the difference between where you stitched and the edge of your fabric. So we are going to finish this edge because it will fray. And here you can see the little frays. And the first time you wash it, your pillowcase shrinks and you get little hairs and threads, and you can only wash it a couple times and your pillowcase falls apart. So we are going to do seam finishes in just a minute. I'm going to go ahead and sew the other part of the pillowcase, and then we're going to talk seam finishes. Alright, so I opened up my pillowcase and I slipped it over the edge of my ironing board so that I could press out that seam, or that line where it was folded on the bolt of the fabric. Because let's face it, we don't want any of those icky wrinkles left when we're done. So we're going to finish up that. Next is the contrasting band. We're going to go ahead and do our straight stitch portion on it. And I'm going to go ahead and press it before I ever go to the machine, just because it's more fun to sew on a nice, warm, flat, unwrinkled piece of fabric than it is one that's got all these creases in it. So I'm going to give it a quick press, and then I'm going to show you how to fold it. Alright, so I've done a quick press on that fabric, and you can see it's a long, skinny piece, and we're going to fold it short end to short end like this. Okay, so there's my short end. That's what it looks like, and I'm going to pin it, and we're going to stitch just this short end. Back stitch, straight stitch down, and back stitch. Okay, I'm pinned, and we are going to go to the sewing machine. Here we are, doing exactly the same thing, lining it up 5/8 of an inch right behind the needle, and I always pull my fabric to the side so that it's supported by the table, not hanging down if possible. And make sure I'm set up for my 5/8. I'm going to go ahead and pull out that pin, take a couple stitches, switch hands here, back stitch, and go down to the end. You can't see what I'm doing, but I'm actually, my hand is all the way over here. That's how I'm keeping it straight. You don't have to be choked up on it all, and you don't have to hold on to the fabric. You just have to, it just takes a gentle motion to do a lot of direction. Let's cut just a little bit uneven right there, you can see. But we'll take care of that in our seam finishes. Now I'm at the end, and I'm going to backstitch. That's it. Okay, so this one does not need a seam finish on the part we just stitched because it's going to be folded to the inside. So I'm going to give this a press now. I'll lay out right here and kind of embed my stitches into the fabric so it gives a nice smooth finished look on the right side. Again, we folded everything wrong sides together. And we do that so that when we're done, the the seam finishes and seam allowances are on the inside of the pillowcase where it doesn't count, and the outside where it's pretty has a nice finished edge. All right, so now we're going to fold this in half. Okay, so here's the circle. I just took it off the ironing board. When I say a circle, see how it's completely a circle all the way around, and I've folded it and I've matched up my two seam allowances. And see, since I pressed them open, it makes for a much thinner, flatter seam right there. If they were all pressed one direction, we would have a lot of layers of fabric and it makes it bulky. So this just keeps that bulk from happening. Okay, so that's all we're going to use that piece for now. We're going to go back to our body piece that we were using, our butterflies, and we're going to do a seam finish. Now there's a lot of different seam finishes. I am going to do 2 pillowcases in this so I can show you more than one seam finish. See my hairs right here, these threads? If you were in my sewing class, we call them hairs, and we give our projects a haircut. So as we go, we trim our threads off and we trim them close, right to the edge of the fabric. So we're going to give it a haircut, and we're going to set our machine. If you don't have an overlock machine, which is one of these, you can just use your regular sewing machine and you set it for a zigzag. So I'm actually going to choose a zigzag on my machine. All right, and my machine automatically sets it up like this, which is about what we want for a seam finish zigzag, which is a width of 3 and a length of about 1.5 to 2. And that makes a pretty good zigzag. I'm going to show you what it looks like. I'm going to stitch it out. Now, I'm not going to put pins in it this time because the fabric's all held together with the stitches we just did. We're going to stitch next to our stitching lines that we just did. So I'm going to pull this, sorry, getting my fabric organized, out. My threads are under the foot and to the back. I'm going to now, instead of setting my fabric edge on 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to line it up with the edge of my foot. So I have the edge of my foot and the edge of my fabric are lined up, and I'm going to zigzag along here. If I set the machine to 5/8 of an inch, I would zigzag over my old stitches and it would give me a very ugly appearance on the outside of my fabric. This way I still keep my beautiful stitch here, and I will have a seam finish. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. And we back stitch on our zigzag, so I'm going to go ahead and sink my needle. There we go. And take a couple stitches and see how it slides sideways. And now I'm going to back stitch. Now if you have too thick of a, if your zigzag is too wide or too close together, it can start to roll your fabric or buckle it. So you can actually alter that. I'm going to lengthen my stitch length to help. See how it's kind of wanting to buckle up a little bit so it stays smooth. And I'm just guiding it, trying to keep it close to that edge. And here is my zigzag. And that is close to the edge but not right on the edge, and that's going to help keep my fabric from fraying. And you can see it rolls a little bit more on the back. I'm going to show you the back side. All right, and then we're going to come back and trim all those ugly threads. We don't want all those showing. So I'm going to zigzag all the way to the bottom. Oops. Doing this one-handed. I'm going to show you a little trick as we get to the corner. Alright, so I'm at the corner, and what I'm going to do, instead of stopping and back stitching, I'm going to zigzag close to my corner, and I'm going to sink my needle, raise my presser foot, and turn the corner. And now I don't have to worry about that corner, back stitching at that corner or that corner being loose in any way, and I can just dig on down to the bottom, and it also makes it a little faster when I'm stitching.
Ooh, you can see it's cut uneven right there. I'll have to go trim that up because I don't like the way that looks. And now I'm going to backstitch. Now I'm going to trim all my threads. Also iron the body of the pillowcase that we just finished doing our seam allowance on. So I've got it over the edge of my ironing board. And I've got it pulled nice and tight so there's no buckles at this seam. And I'm just going to press along that seam, kind of smooth it out a little bit, best we can. Now, the bottom's a little harder to iron just because it has an L in it. It's got the little, it turns the corner here, so it makes it a little harder, but we're going to pull this off, and I'm going to show you how pretty that makes our seam look just with that little bit of pressing. And if you press as you go, your finished project is going to look nicer. So now we're going to marry the two fabrics. So here is my body, and here is my contrast, and I'm going to pin the two together. I'm going to get it set up, and I'll show you how it goes. Okay, this is the band that we sewed earlier, and we made it into a circle. And I'm going to press it really quickly. Always press your seams. When you're done, when you iron against the seams, it embeds the threads into the fabric and gives you a flatter seam. So I'm going across both sides, right against the threads, and then I'm going to open it up and iron this flat. Because this is the band and it's already self-enclosed, we fold it on top of itself, it does not need a seam finish on our seam edge. So we're just going to open it like this, so it's nice and flat. And now I'm going to fold it down. So now, straighten out my fabric. I have a circle, and the circle shows pretty on both sides. So I have my right side fabric here and my right side fabric there, and I'm lining up my cut edge perfectly. My seam lays on top of my seam, and I'm going to press this. I'm going to press straight across, because this is going to be the finish of our pillowcase. This, instead of having to do a hem, we have a self-finished band. We will have to do a seam finish along the band, but we won't have to do it on the top edge. It'll just be where we marry the two pieces of fabric together. So I'm just making sure my cut edge is right on top of each other, giving it a good press. This fabric is super wrinkly. It was like the inside edge of the bolt where it was really wrinkled up. And some of these wrinkles will not come out till I machine wash and dry it and iron it again. Alright, so now this is my band, and this is my body. And I'm going to actually put the body back on real quick, and I'm going to press a couple seams because this is how the seam looks right now. And it's fine, but let me show you when I press it. I'm going to hold it nice and straight and press. And there's the difference with a pressed seam. So before I marry the two against each other, I want to make sure this seam where I'm stitching them has been pressed nicely. So I'm just going to press a little bit down. It's a sack now, so it's a little hard to go all the way down, but we can do that later on the board. Now I'm going to put the two pieces together. So I have this circle and I have this circle. And I'm going to line up my seam with my seam. Here it is. This is why I pressed the seam open. If I had pressed all of these to one side, you can see how bulky that would have gotten. So since they're pressed open, we have less layers, and we're going to lay that on top of here, and my seams line up perfectly, and we're going to pin. And I'm going to pin all the way around the circle. So there's the first one, and it actually is going to fit. So I'll here's my little circle, and it's going to fit down inside the pillowcase along the edge so that it actually will look like that. See how they line up on top of each other? Keeping cut edges lined up perfectly. Again, pinning every 8 to 12 inches or so. kind of stretch it to make sure it stays straight. If your two pieces do not fit together, which does happen, two things are likely. You did not do the same seam allowance, so you have one with a deeper seam allowance than the other. The bag or the band has a different seam allowance than the other piece, or you started with two fabrics that were different widths, and after you did the selvage and did the same seam allowance, because one was wider than the other, they don't meet. So if that's the case, whichever's the wider one gets trimmed down to the shorter one. All right, so now we're pinned together, and now we're going to straight stitch.
All right, so here's my pin right on my seam. You can see it on both sides. So that's my first place I'm holding it together. And when I pinned it, I made sure that my cut edges all line up. Okay, so what I have done, because the band is right side on both sides, it doesn't really matter. So I have matched right side of my body to the right side of the band. Both sides are right side. So as long as we have our cut edges together and it's on the right side, then we're in business. All right, so I'm all pinned together. If you look on the inside, my band is hanging down on the inside of the pillowcase like that. And here's my pins. And the reason we do that is once it's stitched, this flips out and it finishes your pillowcase. So this is the edge of your pillowcase and your body of your pillowcase, and this will be your seam line, and it's completely finished. All the ugly stuff will be on the inside, and we'll do a seam finish on this, and we're going to be done. So now I'm going to sew this. I'm going to flip it back around so you can see. This is now what our pillowcase looks like, and this is a circle now around the edge, and we're going to sew this. I always start at my seam, so we're going to line this up at the seam, move my pin cushion, move my scissors, come to the machine, flatten this out so that I don't have anything underneath caught. So I'm just sewing the layer that I want. So here's my cut edge, my seam line, right, and it's not doubled up where I'm catching something I don't mean to. The threads are under the foot and to the back. And I'm gonna, whoops, line this up on my 5/8 inch line, take out my pin, straighten out my stitch line here. Just wanted to fold a little bit. There we go. I'm going to sink my needle. Okay. Now it's ready. Oh, you know what I didn't do? I did not check my machine. It's still set for zigzag, so I'm going to bring my needle position back up. Set my machine for straight stitch. All right, now needle position back down. And now it's ready to go. And I'm looking, and it looks like my thread came out. I want it under the foot, so I'm going to slide it under. Now it's ready to stitch. Okay, and because we're sewing a circle, you can kind of see how it looks over here. It's a little bit of a mess. I'm going to straighten that out, flatten this. Make sure that nothing's folded up underneath or catching. Sorry it's so wiggly. I'm doing this one-handed. Hopefully the next one will be smoother because my son is going to come and help me. Okay. Straighten this out as I go. So you just stop and straighten your fabric. See what a mess it can be. Smooth it out. There! Nice and smooth. I needed 2 hands. See how I'm coming to this part? So I'm going to sink my needle. I always sink my needle when I'm moving the fabric at the machine because it keeps it from sliding under the foot. It keeps it still. Straighten that in. Now my pins are put in for right-handed pulling because I am right-handed, but because I'm holding the camera with my right hand, I'm left-handed pulling. So I should have put the heads of them pins facing the other direction, and then I could pull this way. But I didn't think ahead. I did it by habit. Now I'm being careful when I'm stitching through here because I have 3 layers of fabric, and the top layer tends to stretch and the bottom layer tends to pull backwards because they're against the feed dog. So you just want to make sure you don't end up with your top layer moving more than your bottom layer and you end up with a buckle at the end. So I'm watching my fabric as I go, making sure that I don't get this little movement like that in the top. And that's why you can see I kind of hold my hand on it to keep even pressure. It's not heavy-handed, but it's just to keep the fabric nice and even. Almost all the way around. See how it's wanting to do this little thing right there? You can see it best right in front of a pin. I'm going to pull out the pin and I'm going to pull the fabric just slightly to take out that excess. Straighten out my fabric. I'm almost back to where I started. And I'm holding down this seam so that it also doesn't buckle back. And now I'm stitching in my old stitching line, and that works the same as a back stitch, so I don't have to back stitch. Stitched all the way around, and I'm going to flip this up so you can see. This is my seam line. So now my 2 pieces are against each other, but we're not done. We have to go back. I'm going to leave it the way it is, and we're going to finish this seam edge. Then we will be done as far as putting the pillowcase together, and we can do some embellishment if we want to. All right, we're going to seam finish. I've got my fabric back under. My seam edge is lined up with my foot. See, here's my stitching line lined up with the foot, and this cut edge is lined up with the other side of my foot. That just works out perfectly for me because that's the size of my foot. And I'm going to set the machine back to zigzag. And now we're going to go around the circle. Again, you don't have to back stitch on a circle because you stitch back over your old stitching line. You start where you stop. So we're just going to zigzag around, and I'll come back when I'm done. All right, I have zigzagged my edge. I still need to do a little bit of haircut here and there, but there's my stitching line. Here's my seam allowance, and here's my finished edge. It's not exactly on the edge, which is intentional, and that's the back side. Okay, now we're going to press it. All right, so I've got it flipped around to the right side now. So see all of my pretty edges, my pretty seams on this side, and on the other side is the seam allowance. So you can't see any of that. That's why we do it. Now it's ready to be pressed, and then we can add lace if we want to, or ribbon. I'll show you how to do lace on this one. Okay, so we're going to do a self-enclosed seam. The last time we zigzagged along our edge. This time we're going to do something different. If you do not have a zigzag, if the only thing you have on your machine is a straight stitch, this is what you can do. So we're actually going to fold in our seam allowance. The seam allowance is the difference between the seam edge and the stitching line. So we're going to fold this in like this, all the way down, and press it. So I'm going to give it a quick press like this. Okay, and when you first do this, it's going to seem really awkward and it's not comfortable, but it gets better the more you do it. And I'm folding that all in toward the seam line and pressing it. And we're going to do that on the top and the bottom. So I'm going to do this all the way down. Okay, and then I'm going to turn it over and do the other side the same way. So now this is going to fold in, and we're going to straight stitch these 2 edges together. This is a mock French seam. It's a self-enclosed seam, which means that the fabric encloses itself. We don't use thread to wrap around it like you would if you have an overlock machine or if you zigzag it. Okay? All right. I'll meet you at the machine. Okay, so I have my folded edges, and you can kind of see it nicely from that angle. See how they're folded towards each other? And I've got it under the machine. Pardon my hand for a minute. I want to make sure that my edge in the back is under the machine, and I'm going to sink my needle so that it holds it, and I'm going to take it just a couple stitches. The way the fabric is set up is I have it between the toes of the presser foot so I can see it nice and clear. It depends on your machine if you'll have toes like that. This is called an open-toed foot, and it's great for this sort of thing. It's used for applique a lot. I'm going to back stitch. Now, you may have want to put pins in there. I didn't. The pressing holds it well enough that I did not, but if you want pins, put pins in. And we're just going to stitch all the way down. I'm not pulling when you see me do this. I'm just helping it hold straight. Don't pull. If you have to pull, your machine probably needs service. The machine's feed dogs should pull it through just fine. And when I'm doing this, I'm just going to flip it around so you can see here's the back side. Because I match my thread nicely, see how pretty it looks? It's a nice looking seam, and it finishes it. It will not ever fray in the washing machine. It'll stay together. It'll make a very sturdy pillowcase. This is a great seam. This is used a lot in clothing making, but it's great for this sort of thing too. I'm sort of finger pinning it. You can see I'm just holding it with my finger. Get to the end. I'm going to actually not backstitch all the way down because I've got to do this on this end. All right. Okay, so now we're sitting at my overlock machine. Sometimes you hear it called a serger, and this is another way to do a seam finish. The serger does not make a straight stitch like this. Everything it does is on the edge of the fabric. You can put a garment together with it. In this case, we're using it just to finish the edge. It does have a knife blade on top and bottom, so it's going to actually cut off all these extra little hairs as I stitch. So I want to just keep it right with the knife edge and stitch. So I'm going to do a few stitches. I love my serger, and if I'm making lots of pillowcases at home, this is how I do it. This is what the overlock stitch looks like. See how pretty that finishes? This is what, when you buy garments and things, you'll see this stitch on it. So this is how we're going to finish our pillowcase that has the mock French seam. We're going to overlock the edge of the band and the pillowcase where we've joined them to finish that seam. And you can see, here's the little hairs that's cutting off as it goes. It is a much more complicated machine to use. You can see it will take up to 4 threads. Some will take 5. And there's no back stitching on this machine. So what I do is, here's my little tail where I started. I just kind of hang on to it so I can trim it off, and I just go right back over where I started, and I just sew on out. And then you can actually, because there's a knife, you can actually use that knife to cut your threads. So there's my finished edge on my machine. So I'm going to show you the inside. Here's our pretty stitch we finished, and here's our seam and our seam finish, and now it's ready to turn around. And there's our pillowcase. Okay, so now I'm going to press it, and you can be completely done at this point, but I am going to do a top stitch, and I'm going to show you how to do a top stitch. All right, so we're back at the machine. I'm going to make sure my threads are under the foot and to the back, and I am lining up this seam edge with my foot, so I'm actually putting it against the inside toe of my foot. My needle right now is in the center, and you can leave it there. Some machines don't let you move your needle position. Mine does. I'm actually going to go and move my needle position really quickly. Oh, I can't. I'm going to have to leave it where it is. All right. So this is my machine. Okay, the machine stitch length is 3. Okay, I'm going to move my needle position over here. It's in the center, and I'm going to move it all the way over to the left. Do you see it move over? So it gives me a wider stitch. I am stitching, I'm going to flip this back so you can see, I'm actually going to stitch this seam allowance down so it can't move. It's going to be stuck down now, but it's also going to give a pretty finish look on the top of the pillowcase. It makes it look a little more finished. So we're going to just stitch. Again, I'm not going to back stitch on this because I'm sewing in a circle, and I will get my, I will seal my stitch. I will get my back stitch when I stitch all the way back around. You have to be careful because you're sewing in a circle that you don't accidentally sew through the back side of your project. And just stop and straighten your fabric. And I'm going to just pull this around so you can see. Here's my straight stitch. Can you see that? It's real fine. It's real fine, but it makes the seam straight. And then on the back side, so you can now see, here's my original seam. This is my new straight stitch seam that's holding down the seam allowance. So we're going to go all the way around, and then this pillowcase will be done, and I will show you the 2 completed pillowcases. Beginner sewers often think that they have to sew and not stop. They have to sew till they've finished their seam, but it's best to stop and readjust your fabric than to keep going. It does not affect your stitch at all as long as you leave it at the machine. Try not to get that in front of the lens. I can see bubbling up a little bit. Alright, so here I am. Let's see if I can straighten this out for you. This is my original stitch, so I'm coming back around. And I'm just stitching back in my old stitches, and it's completely done. Okay, so this is the lace trim that I chose. Lace does have a right and a wrong side. Sometimes it's really hard to tell, but this is the right side of my lace. And I'm going to stitch it. There's 2 ways I could stitch it. I could stitch it so it hangs down on the body or up on the band. I'm doing up on the band because it just shows better. It's more of an accent. I'm actually lining it up right along the seam, and I'm going to put pins in it, and then we're going to do, we're going to stitch just along this edge, and I'll show you how to do that after I put some pins in. Alright, so I am pinning onto an item that is a circle. So you want to make sure when you're pinning, you don't pin through all of the layers, but just the layer you're stitching to. So if you look, when I open it up, it's not pinned all the way through. It's just pinned to this layer. Okay, see how I can separate it? It happens all the time in my class where people will lay it like this and they'll pin through all their layers, and then they sew their pillowcase shut when they put on their trim. So we don't want that to happen. So we're going to make sure we pay attention. And I'm going to have to press my little piece of lace. And now after I get it pinned all the way around, I'm going to stitch it. It will stretch a little, so just be prepared to be forgiving, and I'll talk about this at the sewing machine, but it's going to stretch just a tiny bit at the machine as we go around the circle. Okay, so I'm at the sewing machine with my lace and my pillowcase, and I've got it lined up for a straight stitch. You can also do a zigzag if you do a really fine one. I'm going to kind of straight stitch right down this, the braid part of my lace. Just ignore the little curlings. That's where it was rolled up on its little thing. So I'm going to show you, I've sunk my needle to hold it, and I'm going to just stitch, and you can see how it's stitching right through. And the thing that I'm most concerned about is keeping it right along my seam line and keep the stitch on the braid part. I always sink my needle. Some machines you can actually choose a needle sink option where it automatically sinks the needle every time you stop sewing, and that's really helpful when you're doing trims and things like that. So I'm going to pull out a little bit so you can see this is what's happening. This is what's been stitched so far from behind, and you can't, because the thread matches, the thread matches so well, and it's a smaller stitch, it completely disappears on the braid. Alright, I'm going to stitch some more. Okay, I'm going to show you real quick how I do it without pins. I usually start with a pin or two just to get it started, and then I stop and hand guide it. So see, I have no pins in, and I can move my lace where I want it. So I've got it lined up, and then I just stitch away, keeping an eye right at the foot of the needle. And I can stop and arrange my fabric, keeping it smooth, rearrange my lace, and keep going. All right, I've completed my circle. This is where I started. Here's my start thread that I haven't trimmed off yet. I'm going to straighten out my lace, and I'm going to sew. When I get back to my old stitches, I'm going to sink my needle. Now sometimes you can turn under the lace there, but this is my little preference, and it actually hides, I think, the stitching better. I'm going to straight stitch up, sink my needle, and I'm going to back stitch back. Okay, now I'm going to set my machine to zigzag, and I'm going to set it to a pretty small zigzag, so a lot thinner and closer together, almost a satin stitch. And I'm going to zigzag back over the straight stitch I just did. And now I'm going to back stitch it just a little bit. All right. And that's it. Now I'm going to show you how it looks trimmed off. All right, so here it is out the machine. This is where I've stitched, and this is where I'm going to cut. This is my excess lace right here. So I'm going to actually cut right there. Let's see if I can do this one-handed. And if you have applique scissors, which are special scissors, those are awesome. So here I'm just trimming it off. And that's it. And so this is how that little piece needs. This is the join. But see, there's no edges to pull off right there, so it'll stay together because lace can also fray. So now I have my lace attached, and all of this happens at the seam line. See, here's my seam lines. So I do all of this stuff right here on this one seam line. So all of the areas that we don't like are together. All the areas that could have anything are in one little spot, and they hide nicely. And now there's my pillowcase trim. And this pillowcase is now done.